Mother's Day was supposed to be simple. I took my mom to one of my own hotels for a quiet vacation. We had barely settled onto a leather couch in the lobby when a young man wearing a trainee supervisor badge hurried over. He grabbed us by the arms and asked us to stand up. "This lounge area is reserved for guests applying for VIP membership," he said sternly. "If you're budget travelers, go sit somewhere cheaper. Don't stay here just to enjoy our air conditioning." My expression immediately turned cold. I was about to identify myself when he slammed a printed bill onto the counter and demanded, "And pay the $2,500 dining fee." I stared at him. "We literally just walked in. We haven't even had a glass of water. Why would we owe $500 for a meal?" He rolled his eyes and tapped the front desk with his knuckles. "Everyone who stays here pays it. This is a luxury hotel. Whether you eat or not is your business. You still have to pay." That was where my patience ended. "Call your manager." Instead, he smirked. Then he tapped the name badge on his chest. "Jacob Walker. Remember that name," he said. "This hotel belongs to my stepsister. I run this lobby. Complain to whoever you want. Nobody can help you." I froze. I was my parents' only child. None of my relatives had anything to do with my hotel business. So who exactly was this so-called stepsister who had somehow become the owner of my property? I looked at his badge and memorized his name. Then I said flatly, "I own this hotel." Jacob looked my mother and me up and down as though I had just told the funniest joke in the world. He burst into mocking laughter. "Are you really that desperate to get out of paying the bill?" He curled his lip. "Pretending to be the owner while dressed like that? I've seen plenty of penny pinchers like you. If you want to travel without spending money, stay somewhere modest. Don't come to a 5-star hotel to enjoy free air conditioning and pretend you're rich." I glanced down at our clothes and almost understood why he dared to act this way. Before coming back, my mom and I had wandered through a nearby flea market. We had bought loose cotton and linen outfits because they were comfortable, and together they had cost less than $30. My mom was carrying one of those free reusable grocery bags with a fruit advertisement printed on the side. Inside this sparkling luxury lobby, we truly looked out of place. Jacob slapped the counter with his palm. "My stepsister built her empire across all of Brookhaven with her own hands. The two of you aren't worthy of being here, and now you're pretending to be her?" My mother frowned and looked at me. She had spent her entire career as a respected senior teacher at one of the city's best high schools. She had taught generations of students. She had never imagined experiencing something this humiliating, especially inside her own son's hotel. When she saw me quietly shake my head, she turned toward Jacob. "Sir," she said firmly, "what you're doing is completely inappropriate business conduct. The hotel lobby is a public area. You have no right to force guests out, much less insult them." Jacob was speechless for a second. His face turned red. Then he grabbed his radio. "Security! 2 people causing trouble in the lobby. Get over here now!" Less than 30 seconds later, 4 security guards rushed over. Jacob pointed at us angrily. "I make the rules here. If they don't pay the dining fee, they're not leaving." I looked around at the absurd scene and felt my disbelief slowly turn into irritation. Who was this mysterious stepsister? Which executive had been using my name and my properties to build a private empire behind my back? I reached for my phone and found nothing but a black screen. At the flea market, I had drained the battery recording videos for my mom. If things got worse, she could end up having a terrible experience. So I stopped her from arguing further and looked at Jacob. "Fine," I said. "I'll pay the $2,500. But if this is supposedly for a luxury meal, I want an official invoice and a fully itemized receipt." The moment he saw me pull out my card, a smug smile spread across his face. He immediately ran it through the card reader and accepted the payment without hesitation. Then, instead of printing an invoice, he rummaged through a drawer, pulled out a receipt book, scribbled something onto one of the pages, stamped it, and handed it to me. "The invoice machine isn't working. Receipt only. Take it or leave it." I accepted it. My eyes narrowed. The receipt didn't carry the hotel's official financial seal. Instead, it bore the stamp of another company, Coventry Grand Banquet Catering Services. At that moment, everything became clear. As CEO, I instantly understood the entire scheme. This hotel had heavy customer traffic. Guests were being forced to pay fake dining charges. The money was then funneled through an outside company before disappearing into someone's pocket. This was no longer just misconduct. It was embezzlement, a major financial fraud. I carefully folded the receipt and slipped it into my pocket. "Lead the way," I said. "I'd love to try this luxury meal." 10 minutes later, the food arrived. My mother glanced at it once and slowly shook her head. Several of the dishes had obviously been pre-cooked. Even the juice looked like watered-down syrup. She picked up her utensils and lightly poked one of the seafood dishes. "These shrimp don't look right," she said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "The texture is wrong. They're not fresh at all. They've been frozen and thawed over and over again." She pointed at the steak. "And this steak isn't fresh today either. You're charging over $1,000 for a meal that's nowhere near premium quality." Heads immediately began turning toward us. Jacob's expression changed instantly. Afraid the other guests might start asking questions, he called the security guards over and had us escorted to the most isolated corner of the restaurant. Seeing how uncomfortable he had become, I pressed even harder. "This food is embarrassingly bad," I said. "You can't even fake luxury convincingly." I leaned back in my chair. "Let me guess. Your precious stepsister is just another dishonest person who has no idea what real quality looks like." "Lies!" Jacob shouted. "She oversees purchasing for dozens of hotels across Brookhaven. She just bought a riverfront villa in Lakeshore Estates with cash. Yesterday, she picked up a fully loaded Porsche. People like you could work your entire lives and still never afford one of her tires. Purchasing for dozens of hotels throughout Brookhaven." That description should have pointed to Linda Sullivan, our purchasing director. But Linda had always been discreet, honest, and only a few months away from retirement. I couldn't picture her being involved in something this dirty. If it wasn't Linda, then who had enough authority to interfere with hotel purchasing and run this kind of fraud inside a five-star property? Neither my mother nor I touched the food. My plan was simple. Get to my room, charge my phone, then start unraveling the entire operation. Back at the front desk, I handed over my ID. "Please issue the key card for the presidential suite reserved under my name." The receptionist had barely started typing when Jacob snatched my ID from her hand. He looked at it for barely a second before tossing it back onto the counter. "The presidential suite is reserved for my stepsister's important guests," he said smugly. "People who complain about a $1,500 charge belong in the cheapest standard room at the end of the first floor." My eyebrows slowly drew together. I had personally participated in designing this hotel. Inside the reservation system, the presidential suite on the top floor had always been permanently reserved for executive management. Without my private authorization code, nobody should have been able to change its status. Yet somehow, the suite I had personally reserved had been reassigned. That was enough. I had tolerated enough. Without saying another word, I walked around the front desk and entered the employees-only area. "Sir, what are you doing?" the receptionist cried. I gently moved her aside. Both of my hands landed on the keyboard. As the majority shareholder and one of the people who had designed the hotel's entire system architecture, I knew every administrative command by memory. A few keystrokes later, the records appeared. I stared at the screen. Then I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, beginning last month. The presidential suite, normally priced at $1,300 per night, had been rented by the hour for only $300 to the same recurring group. Every afternoon, dozens of people rotated through it, taking pictures, recording videos, using my private executive suite to pretend they lived luxurious lives on social media. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have cared about superficial online appearances, but they were doing it in the suite permanently reserved for me. $300 an hour, 8 hours a day. That was $2,400 every single day. Money that was almost certainly flowing straight into Jacob's pocket and his so-called stepsister's. I read the records out loud. A flash of concern crossed Jacob's face, only for a moment. Then he recovered and pointed directly at me. "He illegally accessed the hotel's system. He's looking at confidential company information." Then he shouted, "Security! Remove them immediately." The guards started walking toward us. My mother pointed directly at the lead guard. Her voice rang through the lobby like a bell. "If any of you touch us, you'll be exposing yourselves to legal liability for unlawful detention." She looked each guard directly in the eyes. "You're hotel employees, not law enforcement officers. Think carefully before you act." That stopped them. They hesitated. None of them moved another step. At that exact moment, a woman's horrified scream echoed across the lobby. "Oh my God! My diamond necklace is gone!" A woman dressed head to toe in luxury designer brands rushed toward the front desk in panic. "I left my handbag on the lobby sofa while I went to the restroom. When I came back, my necklace was gone. It's a limited edition piece worth more than $300,000. Jacob's eyes immediately lit up. He pointed straight at us. It was them. They were the only ones near that couch. They didn't even want to pay for lunch. They definitely stole it. The woman turned toward us, tears filling her eyes. Please, give it back. Ma'am, I said calmly. We never saw your necklace. I stepped in front of my mother before looking back at Jacob. There are surveillance cameras all over this lobby. Review the footage. A sly smile spread across his face. What a coincidence. The camera covering that couch stopped working yesterday, but we don't need footage. He folded his arms. Nobody here except people like you would steal something. Then his voice became cold. Search them. Search their bags. I objected immediately. The guards moved anyway. Once $300,000 became involved, their hesitation disappeared. My mother hugged her handbag tightly against her chest. Without the authorities present and without legal authorization, she said firmly, none of you have the right to search my belongings. Jacob laughed. Refusing only proves you're hiding something. When the guards still weren't moving fast enough for his liking, Jacob decided to do it himself. In the middle of the commotion, Jacob deliberately stumbled straight into my mother. Mom! I reached out to catch her as she lost her balance. During that split second, Jacob's hand shot into her loose handbag. He pulled something out with astonishing speed and held it high. A dazzling diamond necklace fell onto the marble floor. Several loose diamonds scattered in every direction. The chain bent slightly when it hit the ground. Both my mother and I stood there in complete shock. Neither of us had any idea when he had managed to slip it into her bag. Jacob straightened himself and loudly declared in triumph, "Caught red-handed. What else is there to say? That necklace is worth $300,000. Now it's been damaged too. You'll be compensating this guest." The elegantly dressed woman rushed forward, gathered the necklace and the loose diamonds, then pointed angrily at my mother. "You stole it? And you looked like such a respectable woman." My mother was visibly shaken. "He put it into my purse when he bumped into me." "I didn't steal anything." Jacob placed his hands on his hips. "I planted it?" He laughed sarcastically. "Everyone here just watched it come out of your bag." I wrapped one arm around my mother's shoulders before staring directly at him. "Then let's call the authorities," I said calmly. "They can dust the necklace for fingerprints." "If my mother's fingerprints aren't on it, but yours are, you're going to have a very serious problem." I paused. "Until there's actual evidence, nobody comes near us." For the first time, Jacob looked genuinely unsettled. The mention of fingerprints worried him more than anything else. He hadn't expected me to remain this calm. The security guards stepped back once again. They blocked the exits, but no one dared move any closer. The entire lobby was wrapped in unbearable tension. Then, a slightly impatient female voice echoed from the entrance. "What's going on here?" "A hotel lobby is no place for this kind of scene." Jacob's face lit up instantly. "Finally!" He immediately pointed at us. "These two didn't just break into our hotel system, they also stole a VIP guest's diamond necklace. Please have them arrested." At last, I turned around to face the famous stepsister everyone had been hiding behind. The instant I saw her face, I froze. Then, I smiled. Out of everyone it could have been, it was Lauren Dawson, my former human resources director, the woman who had resigned exactly 14 months earlier with a flawless resignation letter. She had thanked me for years of leadership. She had wished me success. She had promised to carry the company's values with her wherever she went. I had personally sent her off with a generous bonus and a recommendation letter signed by my own hand. Within the industry, everyone knew Lauren Dawson as an impeccable professional. I had been her strongest reference, and now she was standing inside my own hotel, looking at me as though I were the trespasser. Her expression took exactly 2 seconds to reorganize itself. First came recognition. A tiny, involuntary flash she couldn't suppress. Then came the mask. A cold, measured, perfectly rehearsed smile. "Mr. Carter," she said, pronouncing my name with a calmness that immediately told me she had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. What an unexpected surprise. "I don't think so," I replied. My mother glanced sideways at me. She knew that tone. It was exactly the same one I used during board meetings whenever someone presented fake financial numbers. And I already knew precisely where the lie was hidden. Lauren walked confidently toward the center of the lobby. She carried herself like someone who believed the entire building belonged to her. She wore a cream-colored tailored suit, high heels that clicked deliberately against the marble floor, and a handbag I immediately recognized. A limited edition luxury collection, not the kind people buy, the kind suppliers give away when they're hoping for favors. Jacob told me there was a misunderstanding, she said, glancing toward him the way someone looks at a dog they've personally trained. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. There is, I answered. And it starts with Coventry Grand Banquet Catering Services and ends with your initial. LD. Something tightened behind her eyes. Only for a fraction of a second. But I had spent years reading executives across conference tables. I saw it. That's simply one of our catering partners, she replied smoothly. Everything is completely legal. All contracts are properly documented. I'm sure they are, I said. So carefully documented that not a single one ever passed through the purchasing committee or across my desk for approval. Jacob stepped forward, still arrogant, still completely unaware of how deep he had already buried himself. Lauren! These people hacked our system, stole a $300,000 necklace, and now they're making up accusations to get away with it. Have them arrested! Lauren raised one hand. Jacob fell silent immediately. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't running anything. He was merely the face of the operation, the lobby bully, the one who got his hands dirty, while she kept hers perfectly clean. The necklace? Lauren asked, turning toward the wealthy guest. The woman stepped forward, still furious while holding the damaged necklace. It came out of that older woman's purse. Everyone saw it. Everyone, I repeated calmly, after Jacob shoved his hand into my mother's handbag when he deliberately bumped into her. If you examine that necklace, you won't find my mother's fingerprints. You'll find his. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence that fills a room. When everyone begins mentally recalculating what they thought they knew, the VIP guest frowned. She looked at Jacob, then at the necklace, then back at Jacob. Lauren spoke before anyone else could. Then let's call the police, she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. We'll resolve everything formally. The security footage. The necklace. The alleged unauthorized system access. Everything. It was a calculated gamble. She believed involving the police would pressure us. She assumed we'd rather quietly leave than become part of a public investigation, one where our word would compete against hers, and whoever had the better lawyers would win. What Lauren didn't know was what I was carrying inside the pocket of my $30 linen shirt, the receipt, stamped with her company's name, bearing the date, the amount, and Jacob's handwritten signature. A document no court in the country would consider ambiguous, and what she also didn't know was that when I accessed the hotel's system, I hadn't just reviewed the presidential suite records. I had reviewed 14 months of records. 14 months of fake charges, duplicate invoices, suites rented by the hour without passing through central accounting, inflated catering contracts disappearing into a company that carried her initials. I had built this hotel brick by brick. I knew every inch of its financial architecture, and Lauren, brilliant as she was, had made the same mistake every insider eventually makes. She underestimated the owner because the owner had arrived wearing $30 flea market clothes and carrying a reusable grocery bag with fruit printed on the side. I smiled. For the first time since walking into the lobby, I genuinely smiled. Sounds good, I said. Call the police. Jacob visibly went pale. Lauren maintained her composure, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her designer handbag. My mother looked at me and immediately recognized the expression on my face. It was the same look I had when I was 12 years old, and she asked whether I had cheated on an exam. I had calmly answered no. Exactly that, calmly, because I never needed to cheat. I had simply studied harder than everyone else. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Have a seat, Mom, I said quietly. This is almost over. But it wasn't. Not even close. Because if Lauren Dawson had managed to operate inside my company for 14 months without me noticing, then she was far smarter than Jacob made her appear. And people like that, when cornered, don't surrender. They adapt. 3 minutes later, I learned exactly what that meant. Lauren pulled her phone out of her handbag. She dialed a number. She spoke quietly with her back turned toward me. When she turned around again, her carefully calculated expression had completely returned. I've called my attorney, she announced. And I've also contacted this hotel's regional director of operations. She paused. The same executive who personally authorized me 8 months ago to supervise purchasing for this property. I remained perfectly still. The regional director? I repeated. Marcus Hayes, she replied. This time, her smile actually reached her eyes. And he also happens to be the most senior active executive in this hotel group. Ever since you reduced your day-to-day involvement last year to focus on international expansion. Marcus Hayes. My business partner of 11 years. The man I had entrusted with domestic operations while I opened offices in 3 different countries at the same time. The man who had carried my complete trust ever since this company had consisted of nothing more than 2 hotels and a dream. The entire lobby waited for my reaction. I took one slow breath. Then call Marcus too, I said. Tell him to come. We'll settle everything today. Marcus Hayes arrived 22 minutes later. I know because I had been watching the lobby clock from the exact moment Lauren ended her phone call. 22 minutes from downtown during rush hour, which meant he hadn't driven here from our corporate headquarters. He had come from somewhere much closer. Maybe from this very building. He walked through the front entrance wearing a navy blue suit I knew well. It was the same tailored style he wore during quarterly board meetings. His face carried an expression of concern convincing enough to fool anyone except someone who had known him for 11 years. Daniel, he said, using my first name while extending his hand. I'm glad you came. I understand there has been a serious misunderstanding. I didn't shake his hand. Marcus stopped. He processed my refusal with the same speed he always processed financial reports during board meetings, without changing his expression. He turned toward Lauren. What's the exact situation? While she quietly filled him in, I studied Marcus. 11 years of memories lined themselves up inside my head like dominoes. When had our international expansion begun? When had I transferred domestic authority to him? When exactly had Lauren resigned? With that flawless resignation letter I had personally endorsed, the timeline fit together far too perfectly. Lauren hadn't resigned because she wanted to leave. She resigned because Marcus had told her it was time. They already had enough access. Operating from outside the company was simply cleaner. My mother was once again sitting on the same leather sofa Jacob had dragged us away from less than 2 hours earlier. She had quietly reclaimed it without asking anyone, the same way she used to reclaim her desk at the front of a classroom filled with noisy teenagers. Her fingers rested calmly on top of her reusable grocery bag. She watched Marcus with a look I had known since childhood, the same look she wore whenever one of her students lied, and she already knew the correct answer, but patiently waited for the student to walk all the way into his own trap. Marcus finished listening to Lauren before turning back toward me. Daniel, he said, I understand you're upset, but Lauren has been operating under a consulting agreement that I personally approved. Everything falls within the legal framework. If there are specific irregularities you want to examine, we can schedule a formal audit next week. Next week? I repeated. It's the proper procedure. Marcus, I said, you've watched me solve problems for 11 years. You know that whenever I say I want to review something, I don't wait until next week. I reached into my pocket. My phone was still dead. The battery had completely drained back at the flea market. I turned toward the receptionist. She had remained behind the front desk during the entire confrontation, a young woman. She hadn't spoken a single word since Marcus arrived, but she also hadn't stopped watching. Do you have a charger? I asked. She hesitated. She looked at Jacob, then at Marcus. Finally, she opened a drawer and silently handed me a charging cable. I plugged my phone into the outlet beneath the front desk. The screen flickered. The charging icon appeared. While I waited, Marcus tried taking control of the situation. I think the most reasonable solution is for everyone to calm down. You've been guests at the hotel today. I'll arrange a comfortable room for you. A formal apology from the staff. The presidential suite, I interrupted. The one permanently reserved in the system for the CEO. The one someone has been renting out by the hour. The silence this time felt different, heavier, denser. Jacob opened his mouth. Lauren immediately placed a hand on his arm. He closed it again. Marcus inhaled slowly. That's simply an administrative misunderstanding that we can... Marcus, I cut him off. I already found the Coventry Grand Banquet receipt. I've already seen the presidential suite records, and I already know how long it's been happening. What I still don't know, or is the full extent of it. But that changes the moment my phone finishes turning on. The phone vibrated. 5% battery. It was still booting. At that exact moment, I heard firm footsteps approaching from the side entrance. Footsteps I knew immediately. Victor Shaw walked through the service door. His auditor's badge hung around his neck. A tablet rested beneath his arm. 42 years old. Gray beginning to appear at his temples. The exact same unreadable expression he had worn while auditing the books of our second hotel, back when our company was still small. Victor had been the first full-time employee I ever hired, the first person who learned that I had absolutely no tolerance for dirty numbers. I hadn't called him, My phone had been dead, but Victor had maintained one tradition for 11 straight years, every single Mother's Day, without exception. He called my phone simply to wish my mother a happy Mother's Day, because the very first Mother's Day after I was finally able to pay a real salary, he watched me buy my mother a bouquet of flowers from a street market, using almost everything left in my bank account. He always said that memory reminded him why honesty was worth protecting. Today, he had called, my phone had been off, and Victor Shaw, who knew my habits almost as well as I knew his, immediately realized something was wrong. Victor looked at me, then at my mother, then at Marcus. His eyes dropped to the tablet in his hands before lifting again. The expression on his face told me he had already started investigating. I found the activity in the remote monitoring system from my office, he said. No greeting, no introduction, as though he were simply continuing a conversation we had already been having for hours. Someone accessed this property's financial records at 11:47 this morning, using system architect credentials. He looked directly at me. That could only have been you or me, and I was home. It was me, I confirmed. Victor nodded and handed me the tablet. Then you've already seen what I found 20 minutes ago when I logged in to verify the access. I took the tablet. A projection of bank transfers filled the screen. 14 months of financial movements. Not just this hotel. 4 different properties within the group. The scale was significantly larger than I had estimated during the 3 minutes I had spent inside the hotel system before Jacob called security. I slowly raised my eyes toward Marcus. He had watched Victor arrive. He had seen the tablet. And for the first time in 11 years, Marcus Hayes had no prepared response. His eyes scanned the lobby as though searching for an exit that didn't exist. Lauren, however, hadn't moved. She remained perfectly still calculating. That worried me far more than Marcus's panic. At that exact moment, my phone, still plugged into the front desk charger, finally powered on. The screen lit up. 16 missed notifications, messages, calls, a banking security alert, and 1 email, sent at 11:52 a.m., exactly 9 minutes after I had entered the hotel's system. It came from an address I didn't recognize. I opened it. There was only a single sentence. If you keep digging, your mother isn't leaving this building tonight. I slowly looked up. The gleaming lobby, security guards blocking every exit, the woman still holding the damaged necklace and the loose diamonds, Jacob standing with his arms crossed, Lauren wearing the calm expression of a predator patiently waiting, and then everything clicked. The necklace hadn't been an accident. The broken security camera hadn't been a coincidence. They had allowed us inside. They had been waiting for exactly this. We had walked directly into a trap, one that had been prepared for months, waiting for the day I showed up unexpectedly. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I took one slow breath. Then I remembered something my mother used to tell her students at the end of every school year. Whenever one of them had spent months trying to deceive her, she would patiently let them talk. Let them explain. Let them smile. Then, on the final day, she would quietly open a drawer and pull out every piece of evidence she had been collecting since the very beginning. She always said the same thing. The person who sets a trap always forgets one thing. The other person may know how to wait too. I looked at Victor, then at my mother, then at Lauren. Good, I said. Then, let's really begin. The first thing I did was walk toward the security guard blocking the main entrance. I stopped less than 2 feet in front of him. Nobody enters. And nobody leaves without my authorization. I spoke with the exact same voice I used when opening board meetings. That includes all of you. The guard looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at Lauren. Lauren said nothing. That silence alone was enough. The guard suddenly realized the chain of command he had been obeying for months wasn't nearly as solid as he thought. I turned around, then handed the tablet back to Victor. Start with the wire transfers from the 3rd quarter of last year. I want the source of every payment instruction that doesn't carry either my signature or the purchasing committee's approval. Victor was already typing before I finished speaking. I walked back to the front desk, picked up my phone, still connected to the charger, then dialed corporate legal. They answered on the 2nd ring. I gave them 3 pieces of information: the hotel's name, today's date, and 3 words: emergency audit, immediately. Lauren spoke while I was still holding the phone. This is a completely disproportionate reaction. Her calm voice was beginning to sound forced. You have 1 catering receipt and unauthorized system access. That's nowhere near enough to justify what you're doing. You're right, I replied, while putting the phone away. That's why I'll also need the security footage from the service hallway on the 12th floor. The cameras that aren't broken. Jacob frowned. I told you the cameras. The lobby cameras are broken, I interrupted. The service corridor cameras on the 12th floor aren't. I personally inspected them 3 months ago during the quarterly review. They're the only cameras configured to keep 72 hours of continuous recordings without overwriting. I designed them that way. Specifically for situations like this, the color vanished from Jacob's face. So quickly. It would have been funny under different circumstances. Lauren didn't go pale. She simply narrowed her eyes, recalculating. Those recordings belong to the company, she said. You'll need authorization from the regional director of operations to access them. Or from the majority owner, I replied, which would be me. I turned toward Victor. How long before you can download the footage from the remote security server? I'm already downloading it, he answered without looking up from the tablet. That was when Marcus spoke again. And for the first time since this entire conversation had begun, his voice wasn't carefully controlled. It sounded urgent. Daniel, listen to me. I know what you're thinking. You're reaching conclusions without understanding the full context. What Lauren and I did was protect operations while you were overseas. The company needed faster decisions, more flexible contracts. The formal approval process was simply too slow. Yes. We took shortcuts, but the money stayed inside the company. No one stole anything. It was the most elegant confession I had heard in 11 years. He admitted the shortcuts, without mentioning the amounts. He claimed the money stayed inside the company, without offering a single piece of proof. And he described everything they had done, with one carefully chosen word, protected. From the sofa, my mother let out a quiet sound. It wasn't laughter. It was the exact noise she used whenever a student offered an especially creative excuse, one she had already heard 100 times before. Marcus, I said quietly, you've worked beside me for 11 years. You know exactly what it means. When I tell you I've already seen the records, I'm not jumping to conclusions. I'm simply waiting for the numbers. To confirm what I already know, he pressed his lips together. Victor finally looked up from the tablet. Daniel. The transfers sent outside the company total $4.3 million. Over 14 months, distributed across 17 different accounts. 3 belong to Coventry Grand Banquet. The other 14 belong to different companies, but every single one shares the exact same federal tax identification number. The entire lobby fell silent. The VIP guest, who had remained nearby listening to everything, slowly lowered the diamond necklace still resting in her hands. 4 million? She barely whispered the words. Lauren was the first to move. She did it with precision, no rushing, no panic. She simply turned toward the side exit with the same composed posture she had when she first walked into the lobby. Back straight. Measured steps, designer handbag tucked beneath her arm. Ms. Dawson, the security guard stationed at the side door said without moving. Mr. Carter instructed that no one is allowed to leave. Lauren looked directly at him. Move. The guard glanced toward the front desk, where I was still standing with my phone in my hand, then back at Lauren. He didn't move. Lauren stopped. For the first time that afternoon, she didn't have an immediate next move. Seeing her cornered, Jacob made the worst possible decision. He lunged toward the front desk, yanked open the side access panel, and reached for the system keyboard. I don't know what he intended to erase. I don't know whether he honestly believed there was still anything left to erase, but he tried. Victor had already uploaded everything to the cloud 4 minutes earlier. I placed one hand on Jacob's shoulder and calmly pulled him away from the keyboard, not violently. The same way someone moves a chair that's blocking a doorway. You're too late, I said. He staggered backward and looked toward Lauren, like a dog waiting for a command that never came. She didn't even look at him. She was still calculating. Then, she did something I hadn't expected. She took out her phone, dialed a number, and spoke loudly enough for me to hear every word. I need you to file the complaint immediately. Unauthorized access to private systems. Extortion. The case we've already prepared. She ended the call, then looked directly at me. You have 2 options, she said. We settle this privately, or we turn it into a public scandal that destroys this company's reputation for years. You decide. My mother stood up from the leather sofa for the first time since Victor had arrived. She picked up her reusable grocery bag, smoothed the wrinkles from her linen clothes, then quietly walked over until she was standing beside me. She looked at me exactly the way she used to when I was 9 years old. Whenever another kid on the playground told me to give up, she didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I turned back toward Lauren. I've already decided. I dialed the district attorney's personal number. No assistants, no intermediaries. I had known him for 6 years. Years earlier, I had cooperated with his office during a major real estate fraud investigation that ended with 3 arrests and regulatory reforms that newspapers still referenced. I knew he would answer. He picked up on the third ring. I didn't waste time explaining. I gave him exactly 4 things. My name, the name of the hotel. 1 word, embezzlement. Then I told him what I had: financial records, security footage, a physical receipt bearing a company name and official stamp, and 2 eyewitnesses. He told me investigators would arrive in less than 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I ended the call, then looked at Lauren. It's no longer a choice between private and public, I said. It's now a conversation with the district attorney's office. For the first time that entire afternoon, her mask cracked. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way well-built things always break. A tiny fracture appears in one corner, almost invisible. Then suddenly everything begins falling apart. Her eyes swept across the lobby. The guards at every exit. Victor standing with the tablet. My mother beside me. Jacob frozen next to the front desk. His expression looked like that of a man who had just realized he had been used as a shield and would be abandoned the moment things became dangerous. Marcus spoke first. Daniel. There was something in his voice I had never heard during 11 years of working together. Open fear. We can fix this. The money can be returned. Everything can be returned. It doesn't have to go this far. It already has, I answered. I stepped toward the center of the lobby, then spoke with the same voice I used whenever I closed a board meeting. No hesitation, no emotion. Victor will transfer every financial record to corporate legal within the next 10 minutes. The service hallway recordings are already backed up to the cloud. The original receipt is in my pocket. When investigators arrive, each of you will have an opportunity to explain your role. I suggest you use that opportunity wisely. Lauren let out a short laugh. There wasn't a trace of humor in it. $4 million. Out of a company worth hundreds of millions. You're really willing to destroy 11 years of work over that? I looked directly into her eyes. The last 11 years are exactly why I can't ignore it. She stared at me for several long seconds, then turned toward my mother. So much suffering today, all because of one sentimental visit. Her voice dripped with contempt. The great CEO brings his mother to one of his hotels, wearing flea market clothes. My mother didn't even blink. The great CEO, she replied slowly, using the same classroom voice that could silence 30 teenagers without ever being raised, built everything you see. Starting exactly like this: cheap clothes, honest work, and the habit of never judging people by the way they dress. The lobby became completely silent. The VIP guest, who had remained nearby for hours holding her damaged necklace, walked toward the front desk. She gently placed it on the counter, then looked at Jacob. I want my money back. The catering charge you billed me last month, and the month before that. Jacob didn't answer. 37 minutes later, the investigators arrived. 3 men, 2 women, all in plain clothes. They entered without rushing, without raising their voices, as though they had all the time in the world, which, in situations like this, they usually do. Lauren didn't try to leave. Jacob did. He was stopped before reaching the service exit. Marcus quietly sat down in one of the lobby chairs. His hands rested together over his knees. He stared silently at the marble floor, with the expression of someone mentally reviewing every decision that had brought him to this exact moment. While the investigators collected Victor's records and began interviewing witnesses, I walked over to my mother, then sat beside her. On the exact same leather sofa Jacob had dragged us away from only a few hours earlier, she slowly looked around the magnificent lobby, the crystal chandeliers, the white marble, the columns I had personally selected from an Italian supplier's catalog after waiting 2 months for them to arrive. It's a beautiful hotel, she said quietly. I know, I replied with a smile. You should come here more often. I laughed. For the first genuine time that entire day, The presidential suite became available again that evening at 8 o'clock, the same suite they had been renting by the hour, so strangers could pretend to be wealthy on social media. I had it cleaned, then cleaned a second time. After that, I reserved my favorite table in the restaurant overlooking the garden, the one I had always saved for truly important occasions. My mother finally enjoyed a proper dinner. Real silverware, fresh shrimp without black veins. Juice that wasn't watered-down syrup. At one point during dessert, she smiled at me, then repeated something she had always told her students after difficult days, especially when someone had spent months trying to deceive them, only to fail in the end. People who underestimate you always give you the same gift. She paused. They give you time to prepare. While they're celebrating far too early, I thought about it for a moment. She was right. Jacob celebrated when he swiped my card. Lauren celebrated when she thought my dead phone had left me helpless. Marcus celebrated 11 months of operating without supervision. They had all celebrated far too early, and I had arrived, wearing $30 clothes, standing beside my mother, carrying a reusable grocery bag with fruit printed on it. That had been enough. It always is.